I do believe that the world is moving to becoming a less corrupt place. And I think there's a recognition that an economy doesn't grow if you can't eliminate corruption from society. It's a fundamental. And you see that happening everywhere. It's why you see China putting such an effort on it. The second one, and this trend's been going on for about 20 years, and there's no reason to believe it's not going to continue for another 20, is that high growth regions, what we refer to, some would call emerging economies, are becoming a bigger and bigger percent of global GDP. Not percent of growth, but actual percent of global GDP. And my numbers won't be perfectly correct here, but if you look at Global Insight and look at like 1990, 2010, 2030, you see the US goes from like 27% to 26% to 24% of the global economy. Other developed regions, so think of Europe, Japan, Canada, Australia, goes from about 50% in 1990. In 2010, it goes to about 37%, 2030 to 27%. So what we think of as these big economies today are really on a path where they're declining as a percent of the global total. The big change is occurring in what we call high growth regions, which goes from about 24% in 1990 to 34% in 2010 to 47% in 2030. And that's a trend that I think any big U.S. company cannot afford to miss. And it's why we pay so much attention to it and talk about it as much as we do. I'd say there's two different ways to look at a market. I try not to ignore any markets where I can actually sell something and do it by obeying all the laws. Because you'll find that there are some countries where corruption is just rampant. You can put some effort into selling, but unless you're willing to make payments, you're not going to get an order. Well, you don't try so hard, because if at the end of the day all you're going to do is be asked for a payment, then you're not going to do it. In others, you'll look at it and say, okay, they've got a lot of money right now. Who knows how it's going to last, but they do have a good market right now. But it doesn't look like the government commitment to business is sustainable. Well, you want to make sure that you have salespeople in there. Maybe you want distribution. You want to at least be talking in the market. Kind of the third group for me are the ones where I look at it and say, okay, this government is committed. No matter what happens politically, they stay committed to business and whatever contracts or commitments they've made. That's where I'll look at actually doing acquisitions, putting money into building a plant, making a longer term commitment. And as I tell a lot of people, I wish I'd made up this phrase because I like it so much, but it's capital is a coward. And it doesn't go in places where there's a chance it's going to get lost. Or if there's a chance it is going to get lost, the rates of return you require are so high that it just makes it difficult to get anything done. But I pay a lot of attention to what government is doing. I've always felt the ability to predict shocks is impossible. And you can always find somebody who predicted a particular shock. You can't find somebody who's predicted the last three. So you can't just rely on a particular forecast or service or whatever, because you just don't know. The thing I've tried to do is I've often said that Darwin's point was not survival of the fittest. It was survival of the most flexible. So we spend a lot of time talking about how do you stay flexible as a company, whether it's the kind of processes you develop, the systems that you put in place, the kind of portfolio that you construct, so that you're never so wedded to any one thing that if you're right, it takes off, but if you're wrong, you've destroyed the company. So we talk a lot about diversity of opportunity and just having a lot of places, whether it's geographies, products, the end markets and the macro trends that we participate in, so that there's never any one big thing that kills us or helps us. And you saw that happen a lot with the oil shock that we just had, where it went from 100 to 30 in the space of months. Well, we do have oil and gas businesses. Those businesses were affected by it greatly, yet our earnings last year as an industrial company were up 10% again. Yeah, we're best in class. So when you look at that and say, how are you able to do that? Say, well, okay, you got to manage that 13% that it's in oil and gas, but there's a way to do that and still generate the kind of returns you want as a company. Culture matters whether you're a local company, a national company, or a global company. Culture matters. And when I first came to Honeywell a little over 14 years ago, it's one of the first things I focused on is what culture did we want? Because we were two companies that had been brought together and acquired a third. And there were just all these warring cultures. In fact, they even referred to it as the red versus blue wars, with the red being Honeywell, blue being Allied. So we needed to create a culture of our own, say this is what we're going to stand for, which we've done and works great. It actually makes a big difference in terms of your ability to sustain performance over time. Culture matters greatly, and it applies globally also. I never bought into the idea that, well, that's a culture that's good for America and was generated by a bunch of Americans, but it doesn't apply here in India or China or Indonesia. And what you find is culture is general enough that it applies everywhere.